Okay, this is it. This is the Liar Liar song. Captain SKA on the BBC, and the BBC justifying their reasons for not playing it, and the way they talk about impartiality. It's absolutely amazingly bad. Like, here we go. Another one for the Conservatives.
On the iTunes chart, and it could actually be number 1 on the official chart, which is revealed this afternoon. But however high it gets, Radio 1 has said it won't be playing it. Why? Well, because of course we're less than a week away from the general election, and the BBC must be impartial. But not everyone thinks that that is a good enough reason. We can speak to Jake Painter, who came up with the track. We did ask someone from the BBC to come on and explain the rules, but that wasn't possible. So instead, I'm pleased to say we can speak to Kevin Marsh, a former editor at the BBC.
Right, so there's a BBC and they can't get the BBC, so they get the former editor in from the BBC, therefore it doesn't come back on the BBC.
Dr. Peter Goddard, a media professor from the University of Liverpool. Thanks to you, all of you, for coming in. Jake, first of all, where did the idea come from for this track?
I wrote the song in 2010. Initially, because I was pretty appalled at the coalition government and their austerity budget and tuition fees and that sort of thing. So I wrote it then, released it about 7 years ago, and it sort of had some traction on the internet since then. And then I've been writing political music for about 7 years, so released lots of other things too. But about a month ago, when the election was called, I just felt so despondent about where this country's going with the NHS cuts and the police cuts and school funding and that kind of thing, and it just felt like, you know what, I'm going to do this again but aimed at Theresa May.
Let's have a quick listen. We can listen to some of the track.
Oh no, politicians like telling lies, big ones, little ones, porcupines, saying they're strong and stable, won't disguise, we're still being taken for a ride, nurses going hungry, schools in decline, I don't recognize this broken country of mine, they're having a laugh, let's show them the door, then cut the rich, not the poor.
So that is Jake's track. Before I bring in Kevin, were you surprised that it's not being played anywhere?
I'm absolutely horrified. I think it's when you look at the bias in the media, not just the BBC but wider media in general, I think towards the Tory party, there's been so many studies on this. LSE, Cardiff University, Birkbeck, massively weighted in front of Tory policies. So we've got these rules on...
The thing is, we have rules here at the BBC, and I'm sure Kevin can come in on this. I mean, every programme is scrutinised so heavily during an election period. You have to make sure that you give equal weight to political parties so that there is a fair reflection out there. And Kevin, presumably these are the conversations that will be going on right now at the BBC about Radio 1 not playing this track.
Of course. The controller of Radio 1 wouldn't have made the decision on his own. He would have consulted quite widely. And the important point here is that during an election, the BBC has to observe impartiality all the time. That's what the Royal Charter says, that's what the guidelines say. In due course, when the BBC comes under Ofcom, that's what Ofcom rules will say. During an election, it's actually quite hard to achieve.
It's quite patronising. Look at him there. Look, he's there. He's like he's getting told off, isn't he, from all angles here. Like, let's gang up on him.
So we tend to aim for a thing called balance, so that ideas are balanced one with another, appearances balanced one with another, interviews balanced one with another. And the problem, I think, that the controller of Radio 1 would have had here is that it's a very good protest song, excellent protest song.
But you're a very
but
naughty
how does that
boy.
play within the overall balance of an election campaign? I'm pretty sure this track will be played in full once the election is over. And of course, it's not just the BBC. Independent radio stations, they're governed by Ofcom rules. Ofcom rules are actually slightly tighter than BBC rules, as it happens. But at the end of the day, you have this situation where for a few weeks, 6 weeks or so, there is an election, and there is a requirement to be able to demonstrate, not just be balanced, but demonstrate, using numbers, using charts, using spreadsheets, how that balance has been achieved.
But if we're going to be demonstrating balance, look at the tweets from Laura Kuenssberg, Nick Robinson. We don't have balance in the wider BBC. Playing this song...
You can't take tweets out of context. I mean, correspondents and editors are employed by the BBC to give forward their opinions as well as...
their opinion, their Tory opinion.
Within the view, that's right, isn't it, Kevin? Well, within their role as a political editor.
That's right. I mean, the point about impartiality isn't that you're trying to be objective. That's just not possible. But what you are trying to do is look at as much of the evidence as you possibly can, use your experience, your judgment, your expertise to try to come to a view, so that when Nick Robinson or Laura Kuenssberg is criticised, yeah, they're being criticised for coming to a view, but it's a view based on the facts in as much as they can assess them.
I used to vote Labour, but now I'm voting Conservative.
The balance during an election, like I say, that's something that I, as an editor, always had to be able to show with numbers.
And they are literally numbers. We have to tick it off, you know, who's getting airtime. I want to bring in Dr. Peter Goddard. Listening to what's been said, do you think the BBC has got it right here in not playing this track?
It's a very difficult one. Kevin is right that the BBC needs to show balance, but it's not as straightforward as just counting or saying, talking about impartiality. It's how we interpret it. The guidance actually talks about news, and it talks about political advertising. And this track doesn't quite conform to either of those things. In fact, the BBC has, as you have done just now, played it as a news story, played part of the song, talked about it online and so on. The lyrics have been reproduced. So as a news story, it's newsworthy. And that fits into one conception of balance. It's not
exactly. Why aren't we seeing this on the 6 p.m. and the 10 o'clock news?
Kind of situation.
When the non-political people are watching.
It is a song which is in the top 10. Consequently, the BBC sort of has a duty to play it as part of the chart show. The idea of the chart show is that the BBC plays without fear or favour the songs that happen to be in the top 10. So playing it on Radio 1 in the chart show is a particularly awkward situation. And my sense is that the BBC is erring here on the side of caution, because the rules don't explicitly cover this sort of situation.
And of course it's worth saying it's not just the BBC, it's also other independent radio stations, Capital Heart, their networks also aren't playing it.
They play soft music,
they play soft music. If they play it, they'll be criticised. If they don't play it, they'll be criticised.
You know what, I think the BBC and other radio stations should take that risk. There's a whole generation of young people whose futures are looking pretty bleak, and you know, this song has been downloaded and viewed by hundreds of thousands of them, so they've exercised their right to buy it and listen to it, so let them listen to it. I must also add on that as well, before I came on, your editor asked me not to go too heavy on the Tories before this. I mean, I've written an anti-Tory song, but apparently I'm being asked to maybe not be too heavy on this interview, which I feel, you know,
to be
doesn't
fair,
really work
that
out.
once again falls into what Kevin is saying, because, you know, if we're going to have someone on here who does an anti-Labour song and an anti-Lib Dem song and an anti-Green song and an anti-UKIP song, do you see what I mean? It's all about that impartiality, isn't it, Kevin?
It is all about the
but isn't it the fact that no one else is doing that?
I mean, Peter's right.
And
the
he
BBC
is, and it's
win
made the charts newsworthy.
Someone is going to see the decision that the BBC makes as the wrong decision. And that's kind of where you find yourself as a BBC editor. But the important thing is to be able to explain, look, this was the principle according to which we made this decision. Now, in an ideal world, even those who oppose the decision you come to understand the reason why you did.
Ideal world.
They might not accept it, but that's where we try. That's where in the BBC, that's where we try to get to.
Thank you all for coming onto the programme. I appreciate it, and giving us your time this morning. Now, again, we did ask the BBC to explain why it's decided not to play the song. Radio 1 sent us this statement. We do not ban songs or artists. However, our editorial guidelines require us to remain impartial, and the UK is currently in an election period, so we will not be playing the song. And the Vodafone Big Top 40 is a chart show broadcast on 140 radio stations, which include the Heart and Capital network, and is a compilation of the 40 most downloaded songs in the UK. Their spokesperson gave us this statement. During the election campaign, all broadcasting is subject to special impartiality requirements under Section 6 of the Ofcom Broadcasting Code. The lyrics of this song meant that we couldn't play it ahead of the election. Beyond that, we don't comment on playlist
Look
decisions.
at the bottom of the screen.
Now, loads of messages about today's election blind dates with Conservative politician John Whittingdale and the...
Okay, right, so anyway, this was the impartiality of the BBC, and this is what the BBC got from the debate between the two leaders. You know, if you're going to be negative about one, you've got to be negative about the other, because you're impartial, aren't you? This is the impartial BBC, once again, all night for the two Tories. Watch this at the bottom of this screen.
The place where Uber is testing its driverless cars. You were in Paris.
Yeah.
Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have been answering
The
questions
city's
from
Democratic Mayor Bill Peduto says its resurgence has been
from a
based on
studio
green-friendly
audience.
policies.
In the BBC Question Time Leadership Special. Theresa May said she wanted to deliver on the will of the people. Wow, that's good, isn't it? And make sure we make a success of Brexit. That's really good, that's really positive. Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, said he would not make the first use of a nuclear weapons if he became Prime Minister. That's not one-sided, and that ran all night. Come on, BBC Impartiality.